The phenomenon of incorruptible relics has evoked fascination and questioning for centuries. Nearly every culture has witnessed bodies that seem to resist time and nature, unaffected by the tortuous changes of the grave. One of the most ancient accounts is a story from the Chinese chronicles, Lives of Buddhist Saints, which tells of Sun Gui Neng, a patriarch of the Song dynasty, whose body remained remarkably intact after more than 500 years. The Mongols who excavated his remains in the 13th century were astonished. His skin remained supple and radiant, and his heart and liver were intact. This remains a mystery to scholars and believers. A true miracle was observed recently in the Spanish village of Espartinas. Here, in 1977, a crypt containing the body of 11-year-old José García Moreno, who had died 40 years earlier of meningitis, was discovered. Without embalming or any special measures, the remains remained so incorrupt that locals took it as a sign of holiness. They even petitioned Rome for canonization, but there they were skeptical, noting that such phenomena are not considered proof of holiness. Nevertheless, these events captivate the imagination and stir hearts. No less intriguing is the fate of Khambo Lama Itigelov, the former spiritual leader of Russian Buddhists, who died more than 80 years ago. According to doctors and specialists, the Lama's body was remarkably preserved. His skin remained soft, his eyes closed, his fingers movable, and his remarkable living scent lingered to this day. Alexei Azeev, a chiropractor who has been observing the remains since 2000, even claims to be able to detect brain pulsations, which confounds scientific understanding of death. It is not surprising that the dream of touching the shrine attracts long lines of pilgrims every year. Preservation technologies and methods can explain many things, but in many cases, these methods were not used. Joan Cruz, author of The Incorruptibles, identified 3 groups of preserved bodies: those preserved intentionally, those accidentally preserved by natural means, and those truly incorruptible. Particular attention is paid to the second type, where phenomena occur without direct human intervention. For example, the mummy of a child from Chile, found in a mountain cave, was preserved by severe frosts over 500 years ago. Similarly, Iron Age bodies found in peat bogs were preserved by the chemical properties of the environment. However, such mummies cannot be considered truly incorruptible. The burial site and natural conditions also leave their mark on the preservation of the body. Some repositories and catacombs were deliberately chosen for their unique climate and properties. Valery Grushin, a PhD in history, cites the Capuchin catacombs in Palermo and Malta, where bodies, dressed in the clothing of their eras, despite being up to 300 years old, retained skin and muscles that had dried and hardened like stone. The same natural factors are observed in the cellars of St. Michael's Church in Dublin, where the bodies of infants, accompanied by faded ribbons, have remained intact for over 300 years. This phenomenon is attributed to the dry air and lack of dust. Unique preservation conditions are also found in other regions. For example, skeletons frozen without signs of decay were discovered at Wasserburg-Sommersdorf Castle in Germany, despite the presence of low-level radiation in the dungeons, which does not fully explain this phenomenon. In addition to natural conditions, a complex process called saponification, the conversion of fatty tissue into ammoniacal soap, which delays decomposition, is also being considered. This can occur in wet soil conditions, but does not always explain the preservation of the body in other circumstances, which adds to the mystery of the phenomenon. Church teaching interprets such cases as heaven's favor, a manifestation of the soul's sanctity and unusual signs for the living. Doctor of Philosophy Georgy Shishkovets emphasizes that true incorruptibility of the body transcends natural explanations. It is accompanied by unusual aromas, a glow around the coffin, and visions of the deceased in dreams. Taken together, these phenomena give rise to speculation about the existence of some force that alters the usual laws. The questions touch on the depths of human nature and the boundaries of our reality, intersecting with the mysteries of spirituality and consciousness. The ambiguity and exotic nature of the manifestation of incorruptibility is confirmed by examples from recent history. In the late 1980s, the Prophet Muhammad Marwa died as a result of an armed conflict in the city of Kano, Nigeria. His body, initially buried in a shallow grave, was exhumed 3 weeks later and placed in the city morgue. It was unexpectedly discovered that his remains were virtually unchanged, raising numerous questions among experts and believers. These events showed that the phenomenon is not limited to religious cults, but also occurs in other unexpected contexts. Contrary to popular belief, incorruptibility is not always associated with the righteousness or holiness of the deceased. Numerous environmental, chemical, and climatic factors can slow or completely halt decomposition. For example, the bodies of mountain climbers at the highest peaks, where the air is thin and very dry, are preserved in a mummified state. Permafrost, the moist acids of peat bogs, and the unique atmosphere of church basements also contribute to this phenomenon. The scientific community is trying to decipher these mysteries, but has not yet been able to fully explain them. One of the key conditions for the decomposition of bodies is the presence of microorganisms capable of breaking down tissue. However, they do not survive in cold, dry, or highly acidic conditions. Unique natural preservatives create an atmosphere in which bacteria cannot thrive. For example, the cellars of the Kiev-Pechersk lavra, which contain numerous relics, are characterized by precisely these air characteristics. Similar conditions are observed in frozen mountains and underground vaults with low humidity. Thanks to these factors, time does not take its toll on the bodies. Despite the availability of material explanations, there are many cases where no natural or technical factors can fully justify such perfect preservation. This gives rise to speculation about the intervention of higher powers or unknown natural phenomena. People seek answers in religious traditions, science, and mysticism, striving to understand why some bodies decompose quickly, while others seem woven together by time. This diversity of theories makes the study of the incorruptibility of relics extremely fascinating and controversial. The centuries-old symbolism and mysteries of relics continue to captivate those seeking confirmation of life after death and the limits of human existence. Whether it be science or faith, the phenomenon of incorruptible bodies remains a vivid testimony that the world is far more complex and wondrous than we can imagine. This magical interweaving of past and present, spirit and matter, resonates with thousands of people eager to learn more about the mysteries of eternity. Moving beyond the mysteries of bodily preservation, it's worth turning our attention to the practices and rituals associated with relics, which give them special significance in religious communities. Exploring these traditions will help us understand how culture and faith integrate unexplained phenomena into their spiritual practices and perceptions of eternity. Thus, the next section is devoted to the mysteries of church rituals and relics, shedding light on these astonishing phenomena. Natural causes and scientific hypotheses for the preservation of human remains. The preservation of human remains is largely determined by a number of complex and interconnected natural factors that can halt or slow the decomposition process. The main cause of post-mortem decomposition is the activity of microorganisms, which thrive in certain conditions. However, there are many places where bacteria simply cannot survive, and it is there that we often encounter remarkable examples of natural preservation. In high-altitude areas and permafrost, for example, temperature, humidity, and air composition prevent the survival of most rotting organisms. Thanks to the thin, cold air, the bodies of climbers and local residents, barring physical decomposition, remain virtually unchanged for many years. A particularly interesting case is that of long-term mummification, occurring not through artificial interventions, but solely due to temperature, significantly reduced humidity, and soil composition. Permafrost, found in Siberia and Arctic zones, creates a natural preservation chamber. Under such conditions, even internal organs sometimes remain clearly visible. Air chambers in catacombs or dry cellars have similar properties. For example, in the famous catacombs of Palermo, the conditions preserve bodies for hundreds of years. Here, in extremely low humidity and the absence of microbiological irritants, completely mummified remains remain. Another interesting phenomenon is saponification, in which the body's fatty tissues are converted into a kind of ammoniacal soap. This process depends on the humidity and chemical composition of the soil. It requires a moist, oxygen-free environment. Animal fats and fatty acids combine to form a complex substance called adipocere. This forms a protective layer that prevents further decomposition. However, saponification is not observed in all areas with high humidity, raising questions about the precise mechanisms and conditions under which it occurs. The phenomenon of incorruptible preservation can also be approached from the perspective of radiation. In some cases, weak radiation was detected, likely from natural sources in the ground, which, according to some hypotheses, could have suppressed bacterial activity. However, the intensity of radiation activity was so low that the explanation for all instances, especially those that quickly reached the remains of their victims, remains controversial and requires further study. Scientists formally distinguish three categories of preserved bodies. The first are those intentionally preserved through mummification and embalming. The second are bodies preserved accidentally due to unique natural factors. But the remains in the first and final category are considered particularly enigmatic, consisting of truly incorruptible bodies that somehow resist decomposition. However, it is not necessarily preceded by any artificial or natural factor. They seem to serve as a miraculous exception to the natural rules of biology. Renowned researcher Joan Cruz has prepared a comprehensive review of such phenomena. Examples include the mummy of a child in Chile, abandoned in a cave in freezing temperatures over 500 years ago, and Iron Age peat mummies preserved thanks to chemical processes occurring in highly acidic, marshy soil. These peatlands significantly slow decomposition due to their unique environment, coolness, isolation, and lack of oxygen. Furthermore, techniques for preserving individual human bodies or parts of corpses using natural and artificial means are known. These include alcohol, formaldehyde, honey, sand, salt, and even exotic mixtures such as guano. However, these do not qualify as true incorruptibility, as they require human intervention and active preservation of the corpse from decay. Many churches and monasteries boast unique secrets for preserving bodies, often attributed not only to natural causes but also to divine blessing. For example, the basements of catacombs and crypts are characterized by long-lasting dryness and moderate temperatures, which facilitate natural mummification. The special atmosphere of these places preserves tissue for over 200 years, although the skin and muscles often become dry and hard. Relics that retain the lingering aroma and appearance of a living body are often found in churches in Dublin and Kiev. Scientific analysis of individual examples, including crypts in Germany and ancient peat bog burials, highlights the complexity of factors. One of the mysteries remains why complete mummification or saponification occurs in some places, while in others, bodies completely decompose. Equally puzzling is the fact that sometimes the preserved remains even breathe, sometimes exhibiting fluctuations in weight or a slight pulsation, as in the case of the famous Kambo Lama Itigilov. Beyond physical factors, these phenomena are intertwined with faith and spiritual traditions. For example, some scientists and theologians argue that true incorruptibility is not simply the result of environmental conditions, but an expression of a special favor from heaven. This explanation is used to explain phenomena such as the presence of a persistent, pleasant aroma around the body and the appearance of a strange glow above the coffin. Observations of such bodies indicate paranormal phenomena. People report seeing the deceased in dreams, unusual biolocation effects, and energy fields. This prompts reflection on the boundaries between the physical and spiritual, raising questions about the structure of consciousness and reality. As a result, scientific hypotheses and religious interpretations sometimes intertwine, creating a multifaceted picture of this mysterious phenomenon. Research continues, but it's already clear that there's no simple explanation for the incorruptibility of human remains. It lies at the intersection of known sciences and requires an interdisciplinary approach, a fusion of biochemistry, geology, physics, anthropology, and theology. The true secret lies in a combination of unique natural conditions and perhaps as yet unfathomable laws of existence. Moving on to the study of cases where preservation is due to the intervention of religion and spiritual practices, it is worth considering the role of rituals, prayers, and traditions that accompany death and burial, influencing the perception of the incorruptibility of bodies. This knowledge will allow us to better understand how science and faith intertwine in the creation of legends and sacred stories. Spiritual and mystical aspects of incorruptibility and their significance for faith. For centuries, the phenomenon of incorruptible relics was perceived not only as a biological exception, but also as a sign from above, embodying the mystery of the human soul. In many religions, such bodies are immune to the processes of decay, which the Church perceives as a blessing from heaven for a special individual whose life and deeds were imbued with holy purity. This idea is supported by observations of unusual physical properties accompanying incorruptible remains, a distinctive aroma, manifestations of light, and even dreamlike phenomena involving the deceased. Cases similar to each other in these features imbue the phenomenon with a deep mystical meaning, evoking a feeling of respect, fear, and at the same time inspiration. Doctor of Philosophy Georgy Shishkovets, a scholar of church rites, identifies a rare category of truly incorruptible relics, pointing to their uniqueness regardless of the location and conditions of burial. He emphasizes that the absence of decomposition cannot be explained solely by biology. On the contrary, such phenomena open a window into another dimension for researchers, raising questions about the nature of the human soul, its connection to the body, and its relationship to eternity. This understanding is closely connected with the religious worldview, where the physical body becomes a vessel of the Holy Spirit, demonstrating miracles of incorruptible endurance. An example of living evidence is the body of Kambo Lama Itigalov, which retains soft skin and even a pulsating brain many decades after death. Expert Alexei Azaev notes that such evidence is impossible from the perspective of modern medicine, where corpses invariably lose vital functions soon after the soul departs. The presence of a living odor and the mobility of his joints suggests not only the physical but also the spiritual presence of his personality. These observations change the perception of death, expanding the boundaries of ordinary logic and emphasizing the connection between body and soul through the prism of eternity. Paranormal phenomena surrounding such relics often confirm their exceptional nature. A halo around the coffin and dreams in which the deceased appears alive influence the psyche of believers, strengthening their faith and giving them a sense of the presence of a holy intercessor. Religious communities perceive this as living confirmation of the existence of the afterlife and the continued existence of the soul after the death of the body. Such phenomena evoke awe and respect, strengthen spiritual bonds between generations, and provide a living example for ascending the path of holiness. The question often arises, why aren't all bodies, even those of faithful and spiritual individuals, preserved incorruptibly? The answers to this question lie in the realm of spirituality and philosophy, where the concept of heaven's favor does not automatically imply recognition of holiness. Holiness cannot be proven by a single physical phenomenon. Spiritual experience and the fruitful faith of a community are necessary. Therefore, not all whose remains are untouched by time become objects of veneration, but only those whose lives left a deep mark and touched the souls of believers with the powerful force of goodness and light. Events in Kano at the end of the last century illustrate the ambiguity of this phenomenon. The body of the self-proclaimed prophet Muhammad Marwa, which remained intact even after exhumation, sparked a genuine uproar and religious schism. For some, the disaster manifested itself as divine punishment. For others, a message from fate. These ambiguous examples demonstrate the limits of human understanding and the difficulty of combining scientific knowledge with spiritual meaning. Here, faith and science converge in a mysterious dance, providing food for thought and the search for truth. At the heart of these philosophical reflections is the idea that the physical body and the moral essence of man are united by invisible threads. The incorruptibility of relics symbolizes the victory of the spirit over the corruptible nature of the flesh, awakening in hearts a thirst for knowledge of the invisible world. At the same time, questions about the nature of the soul, its immortality, and the deep mechanisms of the universe remain open, arousing the constant interest of thinkers, believers, and skeptics. The phenomenon becomes not only a religious miracle, but also a philosophical enigma, calling for further research. Attention to such objects highlights the importance of memory, traditions, and cultural heritage. Relics are not just physical symbols but guardians of history and spiritual values, shaping the identity of a people. Their veneration strengthens the bond between generations, serves as the foundation for rituals and shrines, enriching the spiritual life of society and maintaining the stability of faith amidst many changes. In this sense, incorruptibility becomes a bridge between the past and the future, between life and death. Thus, the spiritual dimension of the incorruptibility of relics reveals to humanity the profound mysteries of the universe, demonstrating that death is not always the end. These bodies, which have survived the centuries, contain memory, hope, and the potential to transcend earthly, mortal existence. Treating them teaches respect, humility, and faith in the power of the unknowable, in the existence of something greater beyond the visible and tangible world, something that is reflected in the consciousness of every believer. Continuing our exploration, we will move to the realm of concrete scientific facts, studying the natural mechanisms of body preservation and the resistance of time. Here, reason invites us to delve into the depths of biology, chemistry, and physics to understand how astonishing and complex the phenomenon of incorruptibility is from the perspective of modern science.